The cool autumn breeze brushed against Emily's face as she walked home from her small bookshop. The streets were unusually quiet, the faint glow of a flickering street lamp casting long shadows on the road. That's when she saw it. Huddled under the broken streetlight was a dog, frail and trembling. Its ribs jutted out painfully beneath its matted fur, and its tired eyes followed Emily's every move. She stopped in her tracks, her heart sinking at the sight. For a moment she hesitated, unsure what to do. She had seen stray dogs before, but this one was different. It wasn't just lost. It looked broken. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, crouching down cautiously. The dog didn't flinch. It just stared at her, too weak to run, too tired to care. Emily's chest tightened as she noticed the frayed rope hanging loosely around its neck. Someone had left it, abandoned it to fend for itself. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out, her fingers trembling. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly. Slowly she slid her arms under the dog's frail body and lifted it. It barely weighed anything, its bony frame pressing against her. The dog rested its head on her shoulder, and Emily felt a tiny flicker of trust in that moment. "You're coming home with me," she whispered, her voice steady now. "We'll get you fed, cleaned up. You'll be okay." As she walked home, the dog didn't move. It just lay in her arms, as if it had been waiting its whole life for someone to care. Emily didn't know it yet, but this small act of kindness was about to change everything, for both of them. When Emily reached her cozy little home, the dog stirred slightly in her arms, its weak eyes scanning its new surroundings. She gently placed it on a soft blanket near the fireplace, the warm glow of the flames chasing away the chill of the night. "There you go," she whispered, kneeling beside it. The dog's body trembled as it adjusted to the warmth, its head barely lifting to look at her. Its fur was tangled with dirt and leaves, and its breathing was shallow. Emily could feel the weight of its suffering, but she refused to let it go unnoticed. She quickly brought over a bowl of water, setting it down beside him. "Here, drink up," she said softly, watching as the dog hesitated. It sniffed cautiously, its tired eyes flicking between the bowl and her. Finally, it lapped at the water, slow and deliberate, as if unsure it was real. Emily smiled, her heart aching. "You must be starving," she said, standing up and heading to the kitchen. Moments later, she returned with a small plate of shredded chicken she had cooked. She set it down near him and backed away, giving the dog space. At first, it sniffed the food suspiciously, as if it couldn't believe it was being offered something so kind. But then hunger took over, and it devoured the chicken with an urgency that brought tears to Emily's eyes. "You've been through so much, haven't you?" she murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The dog looked up at her, its eyes no longer just filled with fear, but with something deeper, gratitude. It was a look that tugged at Emily's soul. As the hours passed, the dog curled up on the blanket, its frail body finally relaxing. Emily stayed by its side, talking softly, telling it stories about her day and how she'd always wanted a dog but never found the right moment. "Maybe this was meant to be," she whispered, stroking its head gently. For the first time in what felt like forever, the dog closed its eyes, its breathing steady. It wasn't just resting, it was beginning to trust. And for Emily, that was the start of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next morning, Emily woke up to find the dog sitting up on the blanket, its large, soulful eyes watching her intently. It was as if it had been waiting for her, unsure of what the day ahead would bring. Emily smiled, her heart warming at the sight. "Good morning, buddy," she said softly, kneeling down beside him. "Did you sleep well?" The dog tilted its head as if trying to understand her words. Its tail gave a weak but hopeful wag, and Emily laughed gently. "That's progress." She decided to give him a proper name. "How about Max?" she asked, testing the name out loud. The dog's ears perked up slightly at the sound, and Emily took it as a sign. "Max it is, then." Over the next few days, Emily devoted herself to Max's care. She bathed him carefully, removing the dirt and grime that clung to his fur. Underneath the mess was a beautiful coat, though thin in places from malnourishment. She brushed out the tangles, humming softly to keep him calm, and found herself growing more attached with each passing moment. It wasn't just Max's physical transformation that amazed her. He was intelligent, almost too intelligent. His eyes followed her every move, not with the cautious gaze of a stray, but with a deep, knowing awareness. It was as though he understood more than he should, and at times, it left Emily wondering about his past. One afternoon, while brushing his fur, Emily discovered something that made her pause. Hidden beneath the remnants of the old rope around his neck was a scar, a deep, jagged line that spoke of pain and hardship. She gently traced it with her fingers, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Who did this to you, Max?" Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. For a moment, it felt as if he were trying to communicate something, to tell her a story too painful for words. Emily blinked back tears and hugged him tightly. "You're safe now," she murmured. "No one will hurt you again." As the days turned into weeks, Max grew stronger. His coat became shiny, his ribs less visible. He followed Emily everywhere, whether to the bookshop, where customers adored him, or during quiet walks through the town. But despite his gentle demeanor, there were moments when Max's past seemed to linger, like a shadow just out of reach, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their story together was only just beginning. One evening, as Emily and Max walked home from the bookshop, the peaceful air of the small town felt unusually tense. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the narrow streets. Max, who had been trotting happily beside her, suddenly stopped. His ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. "Max?" Emily asked, her voice cautious. She followed his gaze toward a dark alleyway, her heart skipping a beat. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a ragged coat, his movements unsteady. He muttered incoherently, his wild eyes locking onto Emily. She gripped Max's leash tightly, her pulse quickening. "Spare some change," the man slurred, stepping closer. Emily took a step back, her voice trembling as she said, "I'm sorry, I don't have any cash." But the man didn't stop. His steps grew faster, his tone more aggressive. "I said, spare some change." Before Emily could react, Max moved. He positioned himself between her and the stranger, his body tense, his growl deep and menacing. His usually kind eyes now burned with protective intensity as he bared his teeth. The man froze in his tracks. For a moment, his face twisted with fear as he stumbled back. All right," he muttered, retreating into the shadows. Emily fell to her knees, wrapping her arms around Max's neck. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "You saved me, Max. You really saved me." Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of relief and gratitude. As they walked home, Emily couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Max wasn't just a dog. He was her guardian, her protector. She had saved him from the streets, but tonight he had saved her in a way she could never repay. The next morning, determined to learn more about Max's mysterious past, Emily decided to take him to the local vet. She needed to know where he came from and why he seemed so extraordinary. What she discovered would deepen the bond they shared and uncover secrets that would change their lives forever. At the vet's office, Emily sat anxiously as Dr. Harper, a kind and experienced veterinarian, carefully examined Max. She scanned him for a microchip, hoping for some answers about his past. After a few moments, Dr. Harper shook her head. "I'm not finding a chip," she said, her voice calm but thoughtful. "But there's something unusual." Emily leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Dr. Harper gently touched the scar on Max's neck, just beneath where the frayed rope had been when Emily first found him. "This scar, it's not just from a rope. It looks like he was restrained for a long time, maybe even used for illegal purposes." Emily's stomach churned. "Illegal purposes? Are you saying Max could have been abused?" "It's possible, Doctor," Harper said gently, her tone full of compassion. "Dogs like Max are sometimes trained for underground fighting or as guard dogs for dangerous people. But what's clear now is that he trusts you completely. Whatever his past was, you've given him a safe home." Emily looked at Max, who sat calmly by her side. His soulful eyes met hers, and she felt a surge of emotion. "You've been through so much," she whispered, stroking his fur. "I promise I'll protect you, just like you protect me." Leaving the vet's office, Emily felt a mix of emotions, sadness for what Max might have endured and gratitude for the bond they now shared. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Max's past wasn't entirely behind them. Her fears were confirmed just a few days later. While working in the bookshop, Emily noticed a man lingering outside. He wore a black coat and dark sunglasses, and something about him felt wrong. Max noticed him too, growling softly from his spot by the counter. The man eventually entered the shop, his movements deliberate. His gaze swept across the room before landing on Max. "Nice dog," he said, his voice low and unsettling. Emily forced a polite smile. "Thank you. Can I help you find something?" The man shook his head, his eyes never leaving Max. "Number just passing through." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving a heavy tension in the air. Emily knelt down beside Max, her heart racing. "Do you know him?" she whispered. Max licked her hand, his eyes filled with trust. But Emily couldn't shake the unease growing inside her. She had a feeling this man wasn't just a passerby, and that Max's past was far more complicated than she had imagined. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of the man from the shop and the unsettling way he had looked at Max. She tried to brush it off as paranoia, but something about it felt too real, too deliberate. Max lay beside her bed, his watchful eyes scanning the room as if sensing her unease. The next morning, as Emily made coffee, Max suddenly barked, a deep, warning sound she had never heard from him before. Startled, she rushed to the window. Her heart dropped. Across the street, the man in the black coat was standing there, watching her house. His posture was casual, but his gaze was fixed, cold and calculating. Emily felt panic rise in her chest, but she took a deep breath and knelt down beside Max. "We're in this together," she whispered, stroking his fur. "I won't let anything happen to you." Determined to take action, Emily called the local police and reported the man's suspicious behavior. Within an hour, Officer Daniels, a kind and attentive policeman, arrived at her house. He listened carefully as Emily described the man and Max's strange past. When Emily finished, Officer Daniels's expression grew serious. "This dog," he said, nodding toward Max, "matches the description of a guard dog reported stolen from a crime ring we've been investigating. If that man is who I think he is, you're both in danger." Emily's heart pounded. "What do I do?" "Stay alert," Daniels advised. "Keep Max close. He clearly has a strong bond with you, and he'll protect you. We'll start monitoring your neighborhood and see if we can identify the man." As the officer left, Emily sank onto the couch, pulling Max close. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "You've already saved me once. We'll get through this together." Max nuzzled her hand, his eyes filled with loyalty and trust. Despite the fear that lingered in the back of her mind, Emily knew one thing for certain. Max wasn't just a dog. He was her protector, her guardian, and he would do anything to keep her safe. In the days that followed, Emily found herself on high alert. Every shadow, every sound seemed amplified. Max stayed glued to her side, his protective instincts sharper than ever. The bond between them grew even stronger, but so did the sense of looming danger. One afternoon, as Emily closed up the bookshop, the bell above the door jingled unexpectedly. She turned to see Officer Daniel stepping inside. His expression was grave. "We've been monitoring the man who's been watching your house," Daniels began, his tone serious. "He's part of a well-known crime ring. They've been asking questions about a dog that matches Max's description." Emily's chest tightened. Why would they want him back? He's just a dog. Daniels shook his head. Not just any dog. Max was trained as a guard dog for high-level criminals. He probably knows things, routes, signals, behaviors, that they don't want falling into the wrong hands. If they can't retrieve him, they'll see him as a liability. Emily's hands trembled as she knelt beside Max. She gently stroked his head, her voice soft but steady. "You've been through so much. I won't let them take you." Daniels offered a reassuring nod. "We've already taken steps to ensure your safety. Patrols will be increased, and we're working on identifying everyone involved in this case. Just keep Max close and stay vigilant." As the officer left, Emily sat on the floor next to Max, wrapping her arms around him. "You've saved me so many times already," she whispered. Now it's my turn to protect you." Max licked her cheek, his eyes shining with the trust and love that only a dog could give. Emily felt a renewed sense of determination. She wouldn't let fear rule her life, not when Max had fought so hard to be by her side. That night, as she locked up her house, she saw Max lying near the front door, his head resting on his paws, eyes sharp and focused. He was ready, ready to defend her, ready to protect the life they had built together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Emily knew they would face them as a team. It had been a few days since the unsettling visit to the bookshop, and Emily tried to convince herself that life was returning to normal. But deep down, a gnawing fear refused to leave her. Max, always alert, seemed to sense it too. His ears would twitch at the slightest sound, and he'd often position himself by the door as if standing guard. One rainy evening, as Emily was tidying up the shop, Max suddenly stiffened, his head snapping toward the large glass window. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his chest. Emily's heart raced as she followed his gaze. There, across the street, stood the man in the black coat. His dark sunglasses reflected the shop's dim light as he stared directly at her. Emily froze, panic gripping her. The man didn't move. He just stood there, motionless and intimidating. Max barked loudly, a sharp warning that seemed to echo in the silent street. Snapping out of her fear, Emily quickly grabbed her phone and dialed the police. "Officer Daniels," she whispered urgently when he answered. "He's back. The man you warned me about. He's outside my shop right now." "Stay calm, Emily," Officer Daniels replied firmly. "Lock the doors and stay inside. We're on our way." Emily did as she was told, locking the door and drawing the blinds, all the while keeping Max close. The dog's sharp eyes never left the window, his stance protective and ready. Within minutes, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The man in black turned and began to walk away. But it was too late. Two police cars screeched to a stop, and officers surrounded him. He didn't resist, but as they cuffed him, his lips curled into a sinister smirk. Emily watched from the window, her heart pounding. A knock on the shop door startled her. It was Officer Daniels. She let him in, clutching Max's leash tightly. "We've been tracking this man for months," Daniel said, his tone serious. "He's part of a dangerous crime ring. We've also confirmed that Max matches the description of a stolen guard dog they used in their operations." Emily's stomach turned. Why would they want him back? Daniels hesitated before replying. Max wasn't just a guard dog. He was trained to recognize certain people and locations, things that could incriminate them. He knows too much. Emily sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Max sat beside her, his calm presence grounding her as the reality of the danger they faced sunk in. One thing was clear. Whoever these people were, they wouldn't give up easily. After Officer Daniels left, Emily sat on her couch with Max by her side, her mind racing. The weight of what she had just learned was overwhelming. Max, her loyal companion, was at the center of something far bigger and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Max lay with his head resting on her lap, his eyes alert and watchful, despite his calm demeanor. Emily stroked his fur, her voice barely above a whisper. "What have they put you through, Max? And why do they want you back so badly?" The thought of losing him was unbearable. He wasn't just a dog to her. He was family, a protector, and a source of comfort she hadn't known she needed until the day she found him. The next morning, Emily made the decision to take extra precautions. She reinforced the locks on her doors and windows, installed a security camera outside her home, and spoke to her neighbors, asking them to keep an eye out for anything suspicious. The local police also stationed a patrol car near her home to keep watch. Even with all these measures, Emily couldn't shake the sense of unease that lingered like a shadow. Max, ever vigilant, seemed to feel it too. He followed her closely throughout the day, his protective instincts sharper than ever. Emily noticed how his ears twitched at every sound, and how he positioned himself between her and the door when the doorbell rang. That afternoon, as Emily and Max walked back from the bookshop, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. The air was crisp, but the quietness of the streets unnerved her. She glanced over her shoulder, feeling as though someone was watching her, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Max," she said softly, her grip tightening on the leash, "if anything happens, promise me you'll stay by my side." Max responded with a low bark, his gaze scanning their surroundings as if he understood every word she said. As they approached her home, Emily spotted Officer Daniels parked nearby. He rolled down his window as she walked past. "We've got eyes on the situation, Emily," he assured her. "If anything happens, call us immediately." Nodding, Emily led Max inside and locked the door behind her. She double-checked the windows and curtains before settling on the couch with Max. Despite her fear, she felt a spark of determination growing within her. No matter what came next, she and Max would face it together. It was late that night when the inevitable happened. Emily was startled awake by Max's deep, guttural growl. The sound was unlike anything she had ever heard from him before, low, fierce, and full of warning. Her heart raced as she reached for her phone, her trembling hands dialing Officer Daniels' number. As she crept toward the window, Max stood firm by her side, his body tense, his ears pinned back. She peeked through a small gap in the curtain and froze. The man in the black coat was back, standing just beyond the streetlight's glow. But this time, he wasn't alone. Two other figures lurked in the shadows, their movements deliberate and menacing. Emily whispered into the phone, "Officer Daniels, he's here, and he's not alone." "Stay calm," Daniels replied, his voice steady. "Units are on their way. Keep yourself and Max inside." But the man outside had no intention of waiting. With a nod to his accomplices, he began approaching Emily's front door. Max erupted into a fierce bark, his entire body on edge as he positioned himself between Emily and the door. She grabbed the baseball bat she kept by the couch, her heart pounding in her chest. The first knock came, loud, insistent, and threatening. "Open up!" a gruff voice demanded. Emily didn't respond. Instead, she tightened her grip on the bat and whispered to Max, "Stay with me, boy." Moments later, the man tried the doorknob, jiggling it forcefully. "We just want the dog," he shouted. "No one needs to get hurt." Max let out a ferocious snarl, the sound filling the small house with a force that made Emily's fear momentarily give way to awe. His growl was a clear warning. Whoever tried to come inside would face him first. The sound of sirens cut through the tense night air, and the men froze. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street as police cars screeched to a halt in front of Emily's house. Officers poured out, shouting commands and drawing their weapons. The men tried to run, but they didn't get far. Within minutes, they were tackled and cuffed, their faces pressed against the pavement. Officer Daniels was the first to reach Emily's door. She opened it cautiously, Max still standing guard. "Are you okay?" Daniels asked, his eyes scanning the room. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face as she knelt to embrace Max. "He saved me. Again." The police soon confirmed the men were part of the crime ring Max had been taken from. With their arrests, the case against the group gained significant ground, and Emily was assured that she and Max would no longer be targets. In the days that followed, life began to settle back into a peaceful routine. Max was officially recognized as a hero by the local police, and Emily's quiet life was no longer lonely. It was filled with gratitude and love. As they sat by the fireplace one evening, Emily looked into Max's soulful eyes. "You're more than my protector, Max," she said softly, stroking his fur. "You're my family." And Max, as if he understood, rested his head on her lap, his eyes reflecting the unbreakable bond they now shared.